Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
No, Virginia, there is no pro football this weekend, at least not football as we know it. There might be some games with what the Players Association calls scabs, who aren't really professional football players, because the Football Players Association is on strike against the owners of pro football teams. Where's it going to end? Who knows? There are a lot of issues involved, a lot of people involved, a lot of money involved. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll talk about the issues involved in the strike. Our guests are Marvin Gray, who is a professor of physical education at Ball State University, Beverly Pitts, a professor of journalism at Ball State, and in the off-season, a middle linebacker for the Chicago Bears. No, she is not a middle linebacker. She is, however, a staff writer with the National Football League Players Association, who works sometime during the summer and in special events for the Players Association. She's with us today, as well as John Rouse, executive producer of Public Affairs Roundtable, and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State. John, is this a serious subject? I mean, you're talking about recreation, big business, granted, but a recreation, entertainment for people. Is this serious business?
Well, Larry, I think it's very difficult for most Americans to take this issue seriously. But this is an issue of politics and economics and culture, and this is certainly a program that focuses upon those things. And let me try to answer the question by quoting an old political philosopher of economics, Karl Marx. Karl Marx, 100 years ago, said that religion is the opium of the people. Well, in this secular society of politics and economics, where religion has less of an official impact, sports, I think, have become the opium of the people. And so the people every Sunday, in a way, or a certain number of people every Sunday, are drugged by the National Football League players' management and also their players. So to answer your question, this is a very serious question because it has all kinds of ramifications as far as economics and politics, management and labor, and it is at the very heart, I think, in a way, of some very serious discussion about those things.
I don't know, Marvin. I'm having trouble taking this subject seriously. A strike by entertainers, highly paid entertainers, guys who are doing for a living, making extremely good money at a game that millions of youngsters play for fun. Is this serious?
Oh, it's very serious. And I think that it's not recreation, it's not sport in the minds of many people. It is big business. It's next door to AT&T and General Motors in terms of the type of language, the type of financial arrangements that I think Beverly will be alluding to. I'm sure that this past Sunday there were many avid sports fans across the country who were suffering withdrawal symptoms. It was a little bit too early to rake leaves in many parts of the country, so they spent a lot of time with the family, and I'm sure kind of found themselves at loose ends from, say, noon to 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So it's very serious in the minds of a lot of people, and I think there'll be some curiosity with regard to this Sunday with the so-called scab teams playing. Then after that, there's going to be some hard judgments made about whether or not they want to continue watching that or not participating in that.
I have to believe, Beverly, that when people look at the contracts that would guarantee a minimum of $50,000, I mean, to the football player, maybe that's not a lot of money. To the average Joe on the street who watches football on television each Sunday, that's a lot of money. I have to believe that the sympathies with people, with a fan, rest more with the owners and the players. True or not?
Oh, I think that's true, and I think one of the reasons Tom Condon said, you know, every guy out there thinks that just by a stroke of luck he should be on the field instead of one of you players. So there's a sense in which we all identify with the hero, and we all want that kind of hero to perform for us, the gladiator. And so when that's taken away from us, it's the gladiator who's at fault. I think that some of the things that the public doesn't want to know or doesn't know about football is, for instance, the chances of leaving the game injured are 100%. And that's not true in any other sport. And that the career is only 3 years long. So those guys are taking a big risk with their health and with their future every time they get out on the field. And there are some things that go on in terms of the business of football that the public is probably never going to want to know or be sympathetic to. So on the one hand, we really have this conflict between business powers. And on on the other hand, we have this kind of social enterprise that's a part of all of us, and it's very difficult to separate those two, and so really public sympathy is probably not going to be on the sides of the players.
If I could ask my colleagues a couple of questions, getting back to the ethical kinds of concerns, and perhaps we could make some parallels in terms of American foreign policy or domestic policy. It seems to me, for example, that football is a land aggression game. You talk about conquering somebody else's goal, you talk about blitzes and bombs, and it's a very aggressive kind of game. Now, I don't know, whereas baseball is kind of a pastoral game, and so we think of foreign policy in America as being one of aggression, and then we back off, aggression, and we back off. Do you think there are any overlying ethical or moral things that we get from following this very publicized game?
You're referring to the typical sports fan.
The typical
Joe
sports
Sixpack from Pittsburgh.
Joe Sixpack, getting into this thing that is on television so much, that is seen by so many people. Is there any ethical or moral or social thing that comes from something that is so well publicized that sort of, in an unconscious way, sinks down into the American psyche?
Well, in my view, I don't think Joe Sixpack perceives it that way. I think psychologists and sociologists of sport probably do. But for Joe Sixpack, it's kind of an outlet.
Entertainment.
In a sense. And he becomes very, very involved with it. But they don't really view it in a very sophisticated manner from an intellectual standpoint, the way some scholars might. But I fully agree with you that football is, in many ways, a pseudo-military form of activity, and there's all kinds of parallels. The terminology, a lot of the coaches admire General Patton and other military figures. There's all kinds of associations you can make there. So I think in some ways it does serve as a kind of a cathartic activity for the viewer, the spectator, although that whole question is open to a lot of speculation. I recognize that.
What are the issues involved in this strike? At one point, the management owners said free agency is the only issue involved. The players say it's a lot more complex than that. What are the issues?
Well, actually, the Players Association put 8 issues on the bargaining table last March, and they have said from the beginning that free agency was not the only issue, that they were willing to negotiate on all of them. It's really been from management's side that the idea that we are not moving on free agency has made it the kind of final issue. But some of the other issues that are on the table is, one of them is guaranteed contracts, and I think this is another thing the public probably doesn't know, is most football players don't have guaranteed contracts. Only about 3 or 4% of some of the big stars have guaranteed contracts. And so if a player is cut, which happens a great deal in football, if a player is cut, his salary stops. And one of the things that they would like to negotiate is at least 1-year guaranteed contracts, which are much more common in basketball and baseball. The drug issue, they would like to have better drug rehabilitation programs, a shorter collective bargaining agreement so it parallels the television contract, a faster grievance procedure. Sometimes a player files an injury grievance and it's 2 years before it even gets heard, and by that time he's out of the league. They like some player safety issues, like AstroTurf, are on the table, which is not getting a lot of publicity. They would like to see that the outdoor fields that currently have AstroTurf be changed back to grass, because there's a lot of injury data that indicates AstroTurf creates a lot more injuries than the regular turf. And those are some of the things that are on the table in addition to free agency. And the Players Association has said we'll bargain on any of them, and at this point the Management Council has said all they care about is free agency, and we're not budging on free agency, so it's sort of become the issue of the public.
Free agency, the issue when a player's contract expires, he would be free to go to any other team, sign with any other team, and the other team would not have to compensate the team from that the player left. Now, this has been treated differently in each sport. It's different from baseball, from basketball to football. And baseball owners, if you can believe the players, and a recent ruling, baseball owners said, or finally got to the point where they were involved perhaps in collusion. Basically, we have to stop buying superstars out from under one another because we're driving prices sky high and it's wrecking our businesses. Is that a problem in football too?
Sure it is. I think the whole term free agency is confusing because it's used really a couple of ways. The players that are going into play who don't have contracts, who are going in for these games that are now being put on, are called free agents, and actually it's because they don't have a contract. But the term veteran free agent, which is what is really being talked about here, refers to a player who has played out his contract and his option year. The way the contract reads now, a player who plays out his contract and then plays out his option year can go to another team, but if he is picked up by another team, that team has to pay a first round or second round or maybe 2 first-round draft choices, and the team that has his contract originally, even though it's expired, has a right of first refusal. They can match that and keep him. So there's really no ability to move. So I think that's kind of a confusing issue. Ask me your second question. I got off on free agency there.
No, but I think that's it.
Why,
Free
I
agency,
know,
in fact,
yeah.
basketball treats it one way with compensation. Baseball, the owners perhaps have stepped in with their own little side game to stop it. Football needs...
Yeah, one of the reasons, that's what I was going to explain, one of the reasons football managers are so afraid of the issue of free agency is that football is not exempt from antitrust like baseball is. Pete Rozelle has been to Congress several times to get that to happen. Essentially what it means is that the National Football League can't function as a single unit in making any decisions. Each of the teams is an individual business. Now, they can have a unit to represent them in negotiations, as the Management Council does, but they cannot collude. And if they don't have in a collective bargaining agreement a way to keep players from moving around, they're afraid then, because they don't have any trust legislation, that one owner, i.e. an Al Davis, might pay huge amounts for players, and then the rest of them would have to follow suit. And of course now, because of the baseball ruling, they're even more afraid that if they did in any way try to keep those salaries down, they could then be taken to court for trust violations. So that's a concern of theirs. That's one of the reasons that they want to hold so tightly onto the program that they now have in free agency.
If I could get back to some of the ethical things, Marvin, the college football, basically, if you look at the Big 8, the SEC, the Big 10, these conferences essentially have become the minor leagues for these professional, business-oriented National Football League. Do you think there's any conflict that colleges and the educational establishment should have as far as the involvement of these institutions, i.e. colleges, in such a land aggression game?
Well, there's no question but what a lot of the major colleges, some of the top Division I schools, in effect serve as minor league kinds of teams in preparation for the NFL and for pro football. There's been some discussion on that point, in the sense that baseball has to support its minor league system, and professional football has not. And I think the degree to which the NFL has supported college programs is just negligible. Beverly might be able to address that a bit more. There have been other plans suggested where players not be enrolled in school, that they work out of the Office of Public Relations or something of that nature, and maybe have unlimited eligibility. It goes on with some that become even more ludicrous than that. The colleges are watching this very carefully, however, because one of the recruiting ploys that some of the major teams use is that if you come to school ABC, XYZ, whatever it is, your chances of being drafted high are very, very good. And this is one thing that works against the MAC conference. Schools in the MAC traditionally don't supply pro football players.
I would like to just talk about that issue of college players and pro football players. One of the things that the Players Association is very concerned about is that issue that there is no minor league professional way for players to get into the National Football League. And of course that has set up a system that creates a great deal of problems with agents, and we know all about what's been happening with agents talking to players before they've graduated. And one of the things that the Players Association does is regulate agents. Of course they can't regulate an agent unless the player already has a contract, and so the agents that are working with these young college players are not regulated by the Players Association. One of the things the Players Association would like to negotiate for is to regulate agents that are working on rookie contracts, so they could have more control over seeing that this kind of exploitation doesn't take place. And it is a concern, because there really is no way to move from the college football to the professional football very easily without this kind of interference.
Beverly, if I could kind of change the topic in a way, it seems to me, for example, the salaries of the football players, the average salary is going from something like $90,000 in 1982 to $230,000 a year average salary this year. It seems that there's a parallel between the air controllers in 1981 in the sense that the air controllers thought they had so much influence that they became bigger than the industry itself, and they got penalized heavily by it. Is there a chance that the National Football League players think they're so big, so important, that they have become literally bigger than the industry itself, and they're going to damage their own cause and they're going to suffer from this strike?
Well, I think there's no question that both sides are suffering from the strike. I would argue that that is not what is happening with pro football players, that perhaps it's the owners of the team who feel that they own football for the American people, and the fan doesn't really have much of a piece of that. It's really never discussed the fact that the owners make millions and millions and millions of dollars off the teams every year. That's our ticket money, too. Besides, there is a player maybe that's putting his life on the line and maybe making $90,000 for 2 years, and then he's cut and he's not making anything. So I think that the amount of the salary is really not the issue. If you compare the amount of salary of a professional football player to salaries in other entertainment areas or in other sport areas, it's not so high. The issue really with players is that they don't feel that they have a sense of dignity, that they're exploited, and that they really have very little say in what happens to them in terms of their professional skills. And they would like to have a little bit more voice in how they are able to use their professional skills. When there was a USFL, they did have that opportunity, but now we essentially have a closed market, so they don't have that opportunity. I think the idea of exploitation of dignity is one that matters a lot to players. One of the things, too, I think we have to remember is that these players are very young. They're 23 and 24 years old. Their average career is 3 years. So although we know of some of the big names who've been around for 10 or 15 years, and we hear about the Joe Montanas or what have you, most of these guys, we don't know their names. They're going to be in and out of the league relatively quickly, and they're very young, and in many cases inexperienced in terms of public relations and dealing with the media. They've been taken care of by college coaches. They've been taken care of by professional coaches, and now they're trying to find a sense of how to function in a business community that essentially they have very little control over. So we're seeing a lot of the inside of just who these fellows are, and I think we have to remember that they are fairly young.
How different are they, though, from anyone else? I mean, you go into journalism and
Okay.
maybe you're only in the business
Yeah.
a couple of years, and your skills aren't so that you can stay in that competitively in that, so you have to move on to something else. Maybe you sell insurance, maybe you dig ditches, but
Well,
in fact, what's the guarantee for anybody in life?
If I'm in journalism and the Muncie papers don't want me, I have someplace else to go. And if I'm in football and my team doesn't want me, I don't have any place else to go. So there are 1,500 players, and they only have 28 teams to play for, and the team that they play for is already selected. So if you, for instance, are a backup guard and you're good enough to play on another team, but your team decides to keep you sitting on the bench, you don't have any choice about that. So I think that is a difference. In terms of personality differences, I think that football players are a lot smarter than most people give them credit for. There's kind of the cliche. Many of them are working on law degrees, and many of them are very involved in other business enterprises. But I think this is a key factor, too, and I think we as a public have to take some responsibility for this. Only a third of them have a college degree, and that's the highest of all professional sports. And I think that it's interesting to note that even though football players have to play 4 full years before they can be drafted, only a third of them end up with a college degree. So what happens to the typical football player, not the big name that you know, but the typical football player, is he goes to camp. Somebody's told him he's going to get a great contract. 100 players get brought into camp. Only 45 are going to make the roster, and a good number of those are going to be veterans. So his chances of making the team are very slim. He gets cut. He gets waived while he's in camp. He doesn't have a college degree. He doesn't know what to do with himself. Or he might play for 3 games and then he's cut. Or he might play for a year or 2. Then he doesn't know how to get back in college. He's been a big star. He's been a hero. People have known his name. How can he go back and finish his degree? So it's really, they have this terrible sense of loss. And all of a sudden in my life, I've been taken care of all this time. I've been told how great I am. I have all these physical skills, and now I don't know what to do with myself. That's a much more typical story than the Joe Theismann story.
Yeah, and if I might pursue that, there have been some studies done on career maturity of professional athletes, not football players per se, but basketball and baseball as well. And the career maturity level of professional athletes is very, very low as compared with non-athletes. And it goes back to what Beverly says. It probably starts back in elementary school. Practice real hard, you're going to be a high school star. You get in high school, practice real hard, work real hard at improving your game, you'll get a college scholarship. You'll get a full ride. The implication being you just get moved along. You get into college, only a third graduate, as Beverly says, but the emphasis there is on the activity. It's not toward seeking someone else. After all, these people are 19, 20, 21. They see themselves as being the stars. Then the roof caves in. You know, they go to camp and they find out there's 100 people there. They were all pro, all conference. They're unbelievable talent. And finally, you find yourself out in the cold, and
it's a problem that society, has in fact.
Really, in a sense, it is.
established.
We can all think of examples of athletes who were just great in high school and just great in college, and then they just weren't quite good enough to make it in pros. Or after 2 or 3 years, they're out, they're hurt, their career's over, and what are they doing? Some very, very menial type task.
You know, I think we also have an issue here of income versus wealth. The players are seeking income. I mean, as you say, it's a very understandable issue that they would like to have a guaranteed income. At the same time, the owners have wealth, and they have such an investment. For example, Joe Robbie of the Miami team just built a mammoth stadium that must have cost, I don't know, $100 million or whatever. Yeah. And so it seems to be an issue of power. And that's my concern. Perhaps the players could be absolutely correct, but the political situation could be absolutely wrong. And with the theme that is in American society that sport is becoming more and more of a business, I'm just wondering if the players have indeed bit off more than they can chew.
That may very well be the case. We'll have to see. I think you're absolutely right, though. The men who own these teams are men who are used to getting what they want, and they're used to being able to control what they have. They have money, and they've been able to use it in ways that they see are appropriate. And they are not about to want to give up any piece of that power. And they often refer to their players as my boys. And when you think about that for a moment, that's a fairly significant statement. They don't like the idea of the boys coming in and saying, we're demanding to have a little bit more control here. And because football is an aggressive game and it's a competitive game, and each of these, quote, boys have had to fight their way up, we now have two very aggressive, very strong-willed groups of people trying to come to some agreement. It's not the best situation for negotiations. So in other labor situations, in other negotiation situations, perhaps there's more of a sense of mediation. The longer this goes on, the stronger each side becomes in terms of being adamant and not giving in. So I think that you're exactly right. It really is an issue of the nature of the sport and the nature of the sport in society that's created this kind of clash that we now have. I was just going to mention, too, that I think what happens this weekend with the games will be significant because that's a little bit of the power play. Whose side's got the power here?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that NBC and ABC and CBS took the side of management and not the players.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, they don't have to broadcast those games.
No,
but they chose
took
to
the
do
side
so.
of what they thought they could get in terms of advertising revenue.
Yeah, they're in the business too. I mean, it's a
Right.
bottom line.
So in a sense, you're saying that they really didn't side with management or the players. They sided with money.
They decided to see whether the advertising revenue is there. So what will matter is the advertising revenue there? Is the ticket revenue there? Will the people watch this, and will they go to the games? And that will be a major factor. I feel sorry for the 1,500 players that are going out on the field this weekend because as soon as this is over, they're going to be forgotten.
Well, the key is going to be next week because everybody will evaluate whether or not this week was worth it. The TV stations will be evaluating whether or not they want to televise a week from Sunday. Management will be evaluating whether or not more will cross over or not. That's going to be the key. People will watch this Sunday out of curiosity. It'll be a novel type thing to watch 22 truck drivers in cleats at Green Bay. It'll be more than that. Really, in my opinion, the quality of play will not diminish that much because we're talking about people who were they made it to the last cut. They were outstanding college players. Thousands of people watched them in college, but they're just an eyelash away from that in terms of pro play. So
and they don't know the system. The organization is different. They're going to get the ball on the wrong signal. There's going to be a lot of penalties, perhaps. And so, in that sense, the game will certainly not be as professional as it has been in the past.
I don't know. It might be better than we think. Of course, all the coaches are saying how great it's going to be, but we'll wait and see.
Of course, the players, I guess their demand is that they want a share of what it is that they've helped the owners to make. In fact, if the owners have used my skills to make so much money, I'm entitled to a certain share of that. Is football a profitable business? Is it a...
Yes, it certainly is. And of course, since these are privately owned companies, it's very difficult to get those figures out. The research department at the Players Association does a lot of financial research. And one of the things that came out in recent research is that the new television contract is actually, over the length of the contract, going to bring in about $2 million more per team than the old television contract, counting ESPN. But what we've been hearing, of course, is that it's a lower contract. In addition, things like loge boxes and concessions and parking are all money-making things for the owners. So owners are making profits.
And to follow that up very quickly, because we're about out of time, I think, downtown Indianapolis, as a case in point, profits tremendously from the Colts. They've not been that successful, but hotel rooms, restaurants, department stores, you hear all kinds of estimates in the millions of dollars per season. And those kinds of people are hurting too. We don't think about the people who runs a hot dog stand 2 blocks down from the stadium. But those kinds of people are really hurting also and really feeling the effect of this.
It's a big business throughout. I mean, as you mentioned, in Indianapolis, regardless of the debate over whether Indianapolis really has a professional football team. I mean, the Colts are there, and even if the stadium is not filled, the Hoosier Dome is not filled, there's still thousands and thousands of fans who need those auxiliary services and businesses in that area.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of money.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting kind of commentary because this is a big business and it generates a lot of money in terms of the economic upturn for downtown Indianapolis. But yet, it's an interesting kind of priority as we look at other priorities in society. What we pay teachers, the focus upon education, the focus upon health, and all these other kinds of issues. But somehow in our system of capitalism, these things seem to be more important, at least for the time.
But you go back and you look at how much in taxes the Colts are paying, or how much in taxes it means, which do indeed support services, support schools and whatnot. We're out of time today. I'm sorry. Thanks to our guests, Beverly Pitts, Marvin Gray, and John Rouse for their commentary and comments. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Bill Mosier and Mike Seaborg. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.